And our first session we're going to get into right now, it's about storytelling. And many of you said that storytelling was your superpower, which is great. But I bet you're used to telling stories about your companies or maybe about your CEO. Well, this session is about you, your story, your brand, your legacy. And who better to help us on this topic than Patty Sellers? So I'm going to welcome Patty up, and while she comes up, I want to just read a little bit about her so you can understand the amazing treat it is to have her. So you might know of her. She spent 30 years at Fortune magazine. She started out writing about big brands of marketing. She's written more than 20 Fortune cover stories profiling CEOs and entrepreneurs. But she's also one of the co-founders and really responsible for building the brand of Fortune's most powerful women, both the list and the summit. So amazing work there. Now she's gone on to found her own company where she specializes in working with, a few people like Warren Buffett and sitting down with them. They trust her to tell their story. So she's going to tell us how it's done. Patty, welcome. Thank you.
Thanks, Gladney. It's really great to be here, and congratulations on another year of this for pulling it together. Fantastic.
I know. I got a text from Julie, break a leg. I mean, we all know these virtual events are we thought the in-person ones were stressful. This is like a new level, but we're here. We're here. That's why I wanted that pink song. We're here.
Yay.
Well, Patty, there is a quote from the Washington Post profile on you, and it says, you're behind this amorphous concept of power. So for, call it over a decade, you've been the decider of it. Who's powerful and who's not? So why, I guess I feel like that's an interesting word, right? You could have chosen inspiring, you could have chosen successful. Why the word power?
So, okay, I want to clarify one thing. I was not the decider. There was a team. Fortune started most
Patty.
Fortune started Most Powerful Women in 1998, and I was one of the co-founders. And, the top editors at Fortune, who, by the way, were guys, thought there are a lot of interesting women coming up sort of in the corporate ladder, as we called it then. I eventually sort of became famous for using a term called "don't think of your career as a ladder, but a jungle gym," which most of the women, by the way, on the Most Powerful Women list who have, come to lead Fortune 500 companies and be senior executives really embraced. But all they talked about back then was a ladder. And back then, there was one Fortune 500, female Fortune 500 CEO, but there were interesting women in the pipeline, so to speak. And, we decided, and it was a controversial decision, Latney. I mean, it was a gutsy decision at the time. Power was very much a man's word. Women did not like the word power. Oprah Winfrey was number 2 on that list, that first list. I interviewed Oprah for that first story. She did not like the use power word. She did not like the word power. Carly Fiorina, who a year later became the CEO of Hewlett Packard, and eventually, as you know, became sort of famous, thanks in part to Fortune, originally and eventually ran for president of the United States. Remember that? She did not like the word power. Sheryl Sandberg, when I first met her 7 years later in 2005, didn't like the word power. And all of these women eventually came to embrace the word power. But we did that intentionally because power was a word that women didn't like and wouldn't use. And if women were going to succeed in what was then a man's world, they better get used to being comfortable with power. And it was almost like a cause to me. It really was.
So how do you deem someone powerful? Over the years, like what? What made them float to the top?
Well, I mean, this was the first. Fortune was famous for lists already. It was, the Fortune 500. Fortune did and still does the most admired company list. This was the first list that Fortune ever did ranking people, and the first annual list ranking people, and the first list that was not based on numbers or a survey. It was based on judgment. So, how do you judge power? I argued very strongly that we needed to rank these women. If we were going to do a list, we got to rank them. Again, because men think in terms of like power rankings in sports. And
Yeah.
I said, the only way we're going to get men to read this, which is really important because it's a man's world, and if we're going to help advance women, we better address men. So I said, we got to rank them. So how are we going to rank them? Well, we had to develop criteria, and the criteria, which we developed in 1998 and Fortune still uses, is the size and importance of the woman's business in the global economy, the health and direction of her business, the arc of her career, and social and cultural influence. So that's the criteria. And just fast forward, Latany, over 22 years, Fortune has done a really wonderful service to, I think, the world in using that list and building it out into and I had a lot to do with it, so I'll take some of the credit. But in sunlight is the best disinfectant for a problem, and the problem was that there was very little opportunity for women to succeed in the business world. And so we cast the light, and then we build out a global program of events around the world, which Nina Easton, who you will see later in this program, Nina headed the international portion of that program.
Awesome. Well, I of course was researching you and the things that you've written about. And one of the articles that you wrote was Women, Sex, and Power: 5 ways women kept their power, breaking rules and trashing conventional wisdom. Maybe share with the group what these 5 ways were.
So I knew you were going to ask about this. So I dug this out. This is
It's like 90s. It was in the 90s, right?
It was in 1996. And I'll tell you, if this story, Charlotte Beers, for those of you who are sort of your older marketing people, some of them will know who Charlotte Beers was, because she was probably the most powerful woman in marketing at the time. In the mid-90s, she was the head of Ogilvy and Mather. And this is at a time when the iconic David Ogilvy was still alive, who founded Ogilvy and Mather. And in fact, we have a picture here of Charlotte and David and Shelley Lazarus lying in the grass outside of his castle in France. But anyway, Latany, you got me to reread this story this morning. You didn't know I was going to reread this story, but I did. And oh my God, I was shocked, because how far we have come in the world of women in power since 1996. So the first, one of the themes of this is that they don't favor women. So
Yeah.
These women who are at the top of their fields did not favor basically helping other women, because they felt very strongly that they were playing in a man's world and it needed to be an equal playing field. And the other thing that was going on back then was that there was a very acceptable queen bee syndrome going on, and there was very little room for women at the top. And if you got to the top, you could basically help one other woman to get to the top, but there was only so much room. So these women did not really do much, unlike us, right? These women also used their sexuality, and they used their sexuality very openly and undiscreetly in a world where the men were allowed to respond to that. And it's it's kind of appalling to look back and see what, but I mean, you know, I hate to say it, but these women were kind of sharks, and they played the game as the game was played back then. And there was a very broad band of acceptable behavior for both men and women in terms of kind of using sexuality and responding to it. There was a very narrow band of acceptable behavior in terms of women um,
Making
ordering men around in a non-flirtatious way. And so a few years after this was 1996, and then in 1998 I pulled this out too. This is the first Most Powerful Women cover, Carly Fiorina at age 44. You know, a few years later, and the internet is really responsible for this. The internet actually like leveled the playing field for women in a lot of ways, because there was such a demand for talent in this kind of new industry. Well, the internet wasn't until 1990, until well, the internet was like 1990, no, 2005, but the tech boom around 2000. And what happened then was more sort of normal, what I call normal women emerged. And that was like
normal women.
No, seriously, very normal women who didn't who didn't flaunt themselves and didn't sort of flirt in order to get ahead. Meg Whitman was the CEO of a little tiny company, a little startup called eBay in 2000. And I went and interviewed her when eBay had like 500 people. And a woman named Ann Mulcahy became the CEO of Xerox. And so it was the tech boom, and the internet really helped women, even though we view it as a man's world, you know, initially. Yeah.
So 25 years later, I actually would encourage folks just to read it, because it does kind of make you feel a little icky after reading it.
You feel icky. I felt icky. I took a shower after.
Yeah, but you were presenting the truth of 25 years ago.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, I felt icky for a little bit, and then I looked the date up. You know what I mean? Because I just read it, and then I was like, oh, this is 25 years ago. This makes sense a little.
Yeah.
You know how far we've come.
25 years.
Which I do think that we still have work to do, which is why we're still doing things like this. But you know, we have come a long way.
I got to tell you, there's in this first Most Powerful, or no, it's in this 1996 Women, Sex, and Power story. Martha Stewart is still one of Charlotte Beers's best friends, and I met Martha when I was doing this story, and I interviewed Martha and Charlotte and at Martha's apartment, and Martha said, when I was a stockbroker, I was outrageous. I wore hot pants. I was one of the few women on Wall Street. I thought the way of dressing there was just stupid. I had beautiful long legs. So anyway, that's how women got ahead back then.
Well, I'm glad it's changed. I'm glad it's changed.
I am too.
Someone asked about how we define power now, which we're actually going to get to in a second. So great question, Cynthia. Before we go there, I want to transition into storytelling, because people who can afford anyone in the world to tell their story pick you.
Thank you. Or Nina Easton.
Why? Like, what makes a good story? Like, how do you go from milk toast to like a good story?
So I don't want to boast or anything. You're sort of forcing me to, but I spent 36 years at Fortune. And after Nina Easton and I started this storytelling company, Sellers Easton Media, we continued. Fortune asked us to continue overseeing the global expansion and Most Powerful Women, the events, which Nina and I did for 5 years. I just left Fortune completely, like a month ago. Okay. Now I'm 100% an entrepreneur at Sellers Easton Media with Nina Easton and a fantastic team. We tell stories of leadership and impact. And yes, we're doing it for private clients now, whether it's wealthy families or companies or nonprofit organizations. Fortune just had like a really over the top, lovely farewell Zoom for me. And what the editors said, like the top editors at Fortune said, and hey, this is news to me, but they said the thing that makes Patty a fantastic interviewer and storyteller is that she is very empathetic. And I would never claim that for myself. I never have said that, but I've noticed over the years that journalists tend to be really cynical, and I always liked more people than most journalists liked. And so I like people. I really like people.
So you actually really want to know their story, not just so you can tell a good story.
Yeah, and I'm crazily curious. I mean, I really have to, it's one of the things that I have to control. Like when I meet someone new, I want to ask them a lot of questions. I've always been like that. And it's actually a challenge for me in social situations because I want to know more about them.
And they just want to drink their wine.
Right. I don't want to tell you about my childhood and what my parents were like, but I just love learning about people. So, I think that is the secret. The other secret of being I just did a book for a 91-year-old man who was super successful in business. And then we do these private books. And I got a cold call, totally unexpected, from another 91-year-old man who said, the first 91-year-old man said, he told me you're a very good listener. And I said, thank you very much. And he said, he told me you can write too. And I said, well, thanks. So now I'm doing this book, another book for a 91-year-old man. But very seriously, I mean, listening, so many journalists, when they interview people, are like looking at their list of questions and they're not listening. They're not having a conversation. And that is the key. It's like you've got to throw yourself in. You've got to throw yourself in completely to the conversation with someone. I don't even like to use the word interview because to me, everything is a conversation. It's interactive.
Okay. I find, so as CMOs, we do a lot of interviewing, whether we're interviewing a customer to find out why they chose us, or, podcasts are big now. So a lot of us are doing that type of thing. And it's a skill. Like I found you kind of have to ask the same question a few ways, because a lot of times people don't have, they usually have a mask. So how do you kind of get beyond that?
Well, I don't know. It's interesting. Like at Fortune, I was always known as the writer who could get people to open up more than other people did and sort of like tell me about their vulnerabilities and their fears. And I mean, I just think it goes back to establishing trust and not being kind of a gotcha person and wanting to understand them. And if you're a chief marketing officer or a chief market officer, I think that, you're putting yourself in the shoes of of the other person, of the customer, of the client, and you're trying to understand what makes them think. And I mean, all of you who are in this room right now, I mean, that's what you do, right? It's like all about empathy and putting yourself in the shoes of the other person. And that's really what I try to do when I interview people. I mean, I do use the word, of course I use the word interview, but I do like to think of every interview as a conversation. It's
So are you better not prepped or prepped?
you mean, am I better? What
Like,
do you
do
mean?
you go into an interview with a lot of prep, or do you just kind of, you're like, I'm just gonna go where this goes, see
No,
where we go?
I mean, we do these things now called for families called film life story interviews, and we go to someone's home for 2 hours with a film crew, real high quality film crew, TV quality film crew, and we interview them about their life. So the first question I ask, and this has just become kind of a habit and it totally works. I've probably done maybe a dozen of these, if not more, and they're wonderful. There's nothing I like doing better than these, like sitting down with someone for 2 hours and just asking them about their life. But here's my first question. Latney, what's your story? And some people start with, I was born in Brooklyn. Some people start with, I'm the father of 4 children and I have a wonderful wife. And some people start with, I'm an investment banker or I'm a retired CEO. It is an amazing window, like in a second, of how people think of themselves.
And it's just
And
the first
and-
instinct of their own self.
yeah. And so back to your question about of course I have a list of questions. I generally don't really refer to it until I hit like sort of a stopping point and I say, okay, let me just look and see, where we are. But I really don't refer to questions very much, listed questions.
Well, I
have
hope
them.
I hope I can get there one day.
Great. You're a great interviewer.
It's amazing.
We're having a conversation.
It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. So I want to talk a little bit about you, and your story. You're the brains behind Fortune's 50 Most Powerful Women. I'm reading this, and the heart behind its annual summit. This is what people write about you. Are you powerful?
Yeah, of course. And I have always liked this word power. When we started it, I liked the word power. I don't know why. I was just always comfortable with it. There's the New Yorker did I think it was in, I don't know, like maybe about 12 years ago, the New Yorker did this big profile of Sheryl Sandberg. Ken Auletta did it. And Sheryl told Ken Auletta that she had an aha moment when she met me. Like, little did I know that she would mention me in this story, but Sheryl said, Ken Auletta says, Sheryl Sandberg says she had an aha moment when she met Patty Sellers of Fortune magazine. And I remember this meeting. It was in 2005. Sheryl and I met for coffee in Midtown. And she was at Google at the time. She was running the biggest division of Google. This was before she went to Facebook. And she said to me, Patty, I have to tell you, I'm coming to the Fortune Most Powerful Women Summit this year for the first time, but at Google, I can't put the name of that conference in my calendar because we share calendars at Google, and the guys at Google would just think that was like going to a powerful women conference. Like, oh my God, Sheryl. And she really pushed us to change the name of it.
Oh, really?
The word powerful. Yeah. And I said to her that day, I said, Sheryl, I said, power is one of those words that is, power is what you make it. You interpret it for yourself. If power is a negative thing to you, I said, to me, power is a positive thing because power is what I make it. And I think it's about, so the first, Oprah told me when she finally got comfortable with power, she said, power is the ability to impact with purpose. And that was that was like the definition that I liked, that I kind of embraced for many years.
Hmm.
And then I don't know what made me kind of rethink it, but I eventually came to kind of, I think probably starting Sellers Easton and finding my own power through this company with Nina and team. But I eventually came to this belief, and I feel so strongly about this now, that real power is personal power. And especially in this precarious world that we're in, where you don't know if you're going to have your job tomorrow, if you can get up tomorrow morning and look in the mirror and say to yourself, if you lose your job this afternoon and you get up tomorrow and look in the mirror and you say to yourself, am I still powerful? If you can say yes to that, then you have real power. Real power is what you have outside of your tenure and your official job platform. And, for a lot of us, I mean, in the world of marketing, I mean, I'm sure that so many people in this room are succeeding or have succeeded by thinking about your jobs beyond what
Totally.
your job description says. I mean, that's like kind of the only way to make it today, right?
I don't feel like, I mean, just being honest, I don't feel like I could do that. Gosh, me.
You don't think
I think
you
I'm
don't think
defined
you
by
would
my job.
No, wait, what did you say?
I think that a lot, I'm not speaking for everyone, and I'd love to hear some comments in the chat on this, but when you put so much into your job, it does become the definition of who you are in your own mind, maybe not others, but in your own mind, potentially.
But don't you in your job think about what you can do beyond what you're supposed to do?
Yes. The reason I reacted that way is Maria Percolino and I were on a panel yesterday,
Uh-huh.
and we both shared that every time our CEO calls us, we think we're getting fired.
This is the time we're living in, and it's Friday the 13th.
And so, but I mean, you would think, like Maria, I can't believe she's literally the most badass CMO out there. I'm like, okay, maybe it's not so weird, but anywho, we're getting off track here.
No, that's okay. This can
That's
become
okay. That's okay.
This can become a therapy session for us all.
Yes.
Listen, we're living in strange times, right? And we're living in times where people are afraid to take risks because companies are cutting. But I do think that, I've been saying for years that the most important asset, personal characteristic that you can have to succeed is flexibility, agility. And because the world is so fast changing and so unpredictable, boy, this year has proved that even more. It's something I feel I'm challenged to do and to be. I'm like very much like the way I de-stress is rituals. Now it's sitting on the floor with my mat and doing yoga or Pilates every night. And if I don't do that, I'm like really stressed. But so my rituals are kind of weirdly healthy. But
at least it's not tequila.
It's not tequila. No, it's not tequila. It's not tequila, but I have it stored in my cabinet just in case. So thank you very much. But I do think that agility is so important. And I think that one of the dangers of this time we're living in, and I don't know about from a marketing point of view, but God forbid that we stop, that this environment limits our courage and our ability to take risks and to do things differently. I mean, in a way we're forced to pivot, but in another way we're forced to keep, play it safe.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I would say every woman here has been through a year of a lot of change
Yeah.
and had to lead a lot of change. Um, and I'll never forget one of my first bosses. He said, Latney, flexibility is too rigid. You need to be fluid.
Oh, that's
And
I
it was
like that.
kind of a cheesy
I like
saying,
that.
but I was like, that's a good way to think about it.
Yeah.
Fluid. Um, well, I want to ask, and I know one of the prompts we're going to ask in our breakouts is, what would your billboard say, Patty?
Oh, I ask that. That's one of my questions that I ask in my film life story interviews.
Mhm.
um, I think my billboard, if I could write it myself, I think it would say, she connected and shared. So that's what's most important to me. I mean, um, I feel like, if you ask me what I do, or, she tells stories. But in terms of what I want my billboard to say long after I'm gone,
Mhm.
um, I think connecting people and sharing friends is the most generous thing that you can do. To not jealously guard your contacts and your friends. And
Mhm.
so I try to do that. And I really appreciate, and that's kind of what Nina and I did, and the team at Fortune, in building out the most powerful women community. What started as a list became a conference and then became a community. And it's all about sharing ideas and sharing contacts. So, now Nina and I have left Fortune completely, and we are not abandoning the empowering women's space, and we're trying to figure out what we want to do in that space. And you know
Here
working
we
with
are.
you on this is part of like, at least one small way to participate and share and contribute.
Well, hey, I mean, I do have to say on behalf of all of us, thank you for sharing your time and your expertise so generously. The chat was going crazy.
I know, I've been wanting to look over at it, and I
I,
can't
it's
really.
it's like one of those things. It's kind of good, and then but I think we had a good flow, and my hope is that as everyone was listening, it kind of is a good puts us in the right mode to go and talk about our own stories, because that's really what we're going to do next, right, Patty?
We are. I'm excited, and I hope I can stream through this and read all the chats.
So what we're going to do is you guys are all going to be pushed automatically to a breakout like
Okay.
magic. And we want you guys to talk about some of these concepts, what power means to you, what your billboard would say. What are traits that are moving you forward, and maybe some that aren't. So we're hoping that people can get into their breakouts. We've got amazing moderators. Patty is a moderator. So is Nina Easton, her partner, as well as Julie, and I'm going to get her last name.
Schlosser.
Schlosser, who also works with Sellers Easton on storytelling, as well as a lot of CMOs. So I'm excited to see you guys back in 30 minutes with lots of ideas about your own story.
Terrific. I'll be asking questions. I'll be in my elevator. Thanks, Latney. It's great to be here. Thank you.